Deep beneath Vatican City, in a vault hidden behind reinforced doors and endless corridors of silence, lies a place few have ever entered: the Vatican's secret archives. Officially referred to today as the Apostolic Archive, the name change does little to erase the air of mystery that surrounds it. This is not just a library. It is a labyrinth of ancient secrets, forbidden texts, PayPal correspondences, and lost knowledge spanning more than 1,000 years. But among all its treasures and taboos, whispers have long circulated about one artifact more unsettling than all others. A book that predicts every major war in human history. Scholars call it by a chilling name: the Codex Rex Bellum, translated from Latin, the Book of the King of War. Its existence has never been officially acknowledged. No photos, no confirmed catalog entries. Only fragments of references in obscure Vatican inventories and secondhand accounts from terrified clerics who may have laid eyes on it. But what draws such intense fascination to this so-called book is not just its secrecy, it's what it supposedly contains. Detailed descriptions of global conflicts, rebellions, world wars, and even geopolitical shifts that hadn't occurred yet at the time of writing. According to legend, the Codex isn't just predictive, it's perfectly predictive. Each conflict supposedly listed with astonishing accuracy: locations, players, motives, timelines, outcomes, and the most disturbing part? Many believe that the book doesn't just predict wars, it triggers them. The earliest unofficial mention of the Codex appears in the 1495 correspondence of a Vatican scribe named Tommaso Beneventi. In his barely legible Latin script, he refers to a volume bound in black goat leather, sealed in iron, whose contents turned the hearts of men to fire. Beneventi had been cataloging heretical materials at the time: scrolls, rituals, apocryphal gospels, but this book, he noted, must never see the eyes of princes, lest their greed drown continents in flame. From that obscure mention onward, the trail goes cold for centuries. But modern rumors began to flare in the early 20th century. During World War II, as bombs fell across Europe, several Nazi officers and Vatican envoys were said to have met secretly in Rome. At the heart of those meetings, the rumored location of the Codex Rex Bellum. Some believe Hitler. His fascination with the occult and prophecy extended even to the Catholic Church, the starkest vaults. Whether he ever obtained access to the Codex is unknown. But shortly after the meetings, Vatican guards were doubled, and several archivists quietly vanished, removed, some claim to ensure their silence. What's truly unsettling is the Codex's supposed ability not only to predict wars, but to influence the course of them. One legend, passed in hushed tones among rogue historians, tells of a 19th century French cardinal who read a passage predicting the fall of a European empire. Days later, he took a mysterious trip to Vienna. Within a year, Austria was at war. Coincidence or cause? The Vatican, for its part, has never addressed any of these claims. Inquiries about the Codex Rex Bellum are ignored or denied. Researchers requesting access to war-predictive texts are blacklisted or sent to unrelated documents. But silence, in this case, only fuels suspicion. Why deny the existence of something that, if purely mythological, shouldn't pose any threat, unless, of course, there's truth behind the myth? Another troubling rumor stems from a Jesuit scholar in the 1970s who, after decades of service, abruptly left the order and disappeared. A year later, a letter attributed to him surfaced in Argentina. In it, he wrote, "They guard a book not out of reverence but out of fear. It does not prophesy, it commands. I have seen the names of wars not yet fought. I have seen dates not yet come. I begged them to destroy it. They laughed. Strange as it sounds, the concept of predictive texts is not new. From the Sibylline books of ancient Rome to the cryptic verses of Nostradamus, history is littered with attempts to peer into the future. But the Codex Rex Bellum is different. It's not poetic. It's not symbolic, according to those who claim to have seen it. It's clinical. Dates, countries, strategies, even casualty estimates. Pages written in multiple languages, layered with cryptographic seals and marginal notes that shift over time. Some say it rewrites itself. Others say it's updated by someone or something hidden within the church. The idea of a book that predicts wars and, perhaps even influences them is terrifying. It's not just because of what it might contain, but because of who might use it. In the wrong hands, Such knowledge could manipulate global events, steer political decisions, or even manufacture conflict where none was necessary. And if this book does indeed exist in the vaults beneath Vatican City, the question becomes unavoidable. Why hide it? Is it to protect us or to control us? And yet, for all the fear and speculation, another possibility lingers, that the book was never meant to be hidden. That long ago, someone, perhaps a mystic, perhaps an oracle, intended to warn future generations, to show them how close we are, always, to tearing ourselves apart. But instead of sharing that warning, the Church locked it away, afraid of the power it might unleash. The deeper one looks, the more tangled the story becomes. Priests silenced, letters intercepted, scholars excommunicated for researching forbidden texts, and always the whisper of war lingering just around the corner, as if someone somewhere keeps turning the pages. But where did the codex come from? That's where the story leads us next, into a darker time, a shadowy period in the Church's history, when mysticism, prophecy, and politics collided behind closed cathedral doors. And it all begins with the mysterious man who may have written the first words of the book, centuries before the wars it predicted ever began. The man was known only as Lucius Anfortes, a name that appears nowhere in papal registries, no baptismal records, no official documentation in any diocesan archive. And yet, throughout obscure texts and forgotten letters of 14th century France, his name emerges again and again, always connected to prophecy, secrecy, and war. Some claimed he was a monk. Others believed he had never taken holy orders at all. But one thing remains consistent. Lucius was a scribe stationed in Avignon during the Avignon papacy, when 7 successive popes ruled from France instead of Rome, and it was there, the cool stone corridors of a church pulled between faith and power, that the earliest form of the Codex Rex Bellum may have been born. According to one fragment, a letter from Cardinal Pier de Rigo, dated 1357, Lucius was tasked with compiling intelligence reports from across Europe, not holy texts, not scripture. Military observations, collected patterns in border skirmishes, troop movements, famine pressures, even celestial phenomena. Sound. Ursula blatantly said and lied. They were part of a larger project, whose purpose no one dared put in writing. Rigaud's letter hints only that Lucius's manuscript is not one of earthly origin, though it passed through mortal hands. The strange part? Lucius predicted the 100 Years' War in exacting detail long before its first major battles. He recorded in Latin, shorthand, and ciphers. A scenario involving the death of a French prince, rising tensions with England, and a conflict that would endure beyond one generation. His notes, preserved in secret by an underground fraternity of church scribes, reference 3 crowns drowned in red tides, and a hammer from the west pounding the fleur-de-lis. Scholars today see these as poetic images. But to contemporaries, they were direct calls to arms in anticipation of bloodshed that had not yet arrived. The mystery deepens when one examines the Black Codex of Toulouse, a rare and heavily redacted volume held in a private collection in Spain. This codex, believed by some to be an early fragment of the Rex Bellum, includes diagrams of battlefield formations from wars not fought until the 19th century. Footnotes written in an ink carbon-dated. To the 1300s mention names like Napoleon and Tsar Alexander. Historians dismiss it as forgery, but no convincing evidence disproves its authenticity. Lucius himself vanished from the record in 1362. No death certificate, no monastery log, gone. But the Church's reaction was immediate. Pope Innocent VI ordered a total cleansing of the Avignon scriptorium, according to internal church correspondences. Several scribes were relocated or silenced. The library's records from that year were incinerated, and yet the knowledge Lucius had gathered refused to die. Some believe he had followers in order of silent quills, scribes who carried forward his predictive methods in hiding. They supposedly operated from within cathedrals across Europe, using confessionals and coded homilies to share glimpses of the future. Their symbol, a feather pierced by a sword, often carved subtly into woodwork or hidden in stained glass. By the time the papacy returned to Rome in 1377, the codex, or at least fragments of it, had begun migrating through hidden channels. One version surfaced in Venice in the 1400s, another in Lisbon, always cloaked in secrecy, always spoken of with reverence and fear. And each time a version appeared, a war followed. The Portuguese Restoration War, the Burgundian conflicts, the War of the Roses. And then, just as suddenly as it had dispersed, the codex was brought back, consolidated, according to Vatican rumors. During the rise of Pope Alexander V, it was under his scandal-plagued rule that the codex is believed to have been sealed permanently within the Vatican's underground library, an inner sanctum, guarded by loyalty oaths, enforced by silence. But those who pursued the codex's trail refused to believe it was simply locked away and forgotten. There are too many signs, too many coincidences. In 1588, as the Spanish Armada prepared to launch its assault on England, an anonymous tract appeared in Rome, predicting disaster at sea. No name, no publisher, just the phrase Bellum tenet, scriptum, the war's already written. The Armada was decimated by storms and English defenses. During the Napoleonic era, as French troops neared Rome, Vatican clerks reportedly attempted to smuggle certain volumes out of the archives. Napoleon's men never found them, but one intercepted letter between clerks referenced the Book of Wars, marked by Anfordus's cipher. Again, Lucius, centuries after his disappearance, was at the center of it all. And now, in modern times, more eyes are turning toward the Vatican and asking uncomfortable questions. What if the Codex Rex Bellum was never about prediction at all? What if Lucius Anfordus, and those who followed, had found a formula pattern in human nature so reliable, so unchanging, that war itself could be forecast as easily as the tide? Was Lucius a prophet, a spy, a demon in a monk's robe, or simply the first to see what none of us want to admit that? We are destined to repeat the same violent patterns again and again. And the Codex merely reflects that cycle? Whatever the truth, the Vatican has kept the Codex hidden. But as global tensions rise once again, new conflicts brewing in every corner of the earth, one must wonder, is someone, somewhere, turning its pages right now? And if so, what war comes next? The next chapter of this forbidden tale, we trace the Codex's suspected involvement in shaping the 20th century's most catastrophic wars, and uncover how a handful of pages may have determined the fate of millions. By the time the world stumbled into the madness of the 20th century, the whispers of the Codex Rex Bellum had all but vanished from public discourse. The Vatican, under layers of bureaucratic reshuffling and growing political entanglements, had become even more opaque, its archives a labyrinth of permissions, hidden chambers, and silence. And yet, beneath this surface of bureaucratic normalcy, something stirred. The first documented resurfacing of the Codex in the modern era came not from Europe, but America. In 1911, a Jesuit priest named Father Michael Harrigan sent a classified report to the Vatican's Secretary of State. The report, now partially declassified, references a pattern script embedded within documents stolen from a French noble family that had fled to Quebec. These documents, cloaked in medieval Latin and riddled with geometrical symbols, contain predictions of a continental conflict beginning in the second decade of the 20th century. More alarmingly, it outlined the assassination of an Eastern monarch and the shaking of the Three Lions. Historians now connect this cryptic warning to the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914 and the TNS subsequent unraveling of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Three Lions likely refer to Britain's coat of arms. Coincidence? Perhaps, but Father Harrigan's personal journals, discovered posthumously, record a chilling note. The book sees too much, does not predict it, remembers forward. It wasn't long before military intelligence agencies began quietly poking into Vatican records. During World War I, rumors swirled that German agents attempted to infiltrate the Vatican library. They failed, but one archivist, a Benedictine monk named Brother Paulus, disappeared shortly after the war, His last recorded assignment cataloging esoteric prophecy volumes, Codex X classification. Codex X was a system reportedly used by the Vatican to classify anomalous or forbidden texts, especially those suspected of being linked to predictive or supernatural phenomena. But it was World War II that exposed just how closely the Codex may have clung to the shadows of modern warfare. In 1938, a memo from Cardinal Eugenio Pacella, soon to become Pope Pius XII, was circulated among only 5 members of the Inner Curia. The memo detailed the resurgence of Anfurtus doctrine, describing a belief that history now fulfills itself through cyclical flames, not divine randomness. One line stood out: "The Black Cross rises in accordance with the hidden pages, precisely as foretold." The Black Cross, Vatican scholars now believe, was a direct reference to the Nazi symbol, and some even suggest that the Codex predicted Hitler's rise. Or more controversially, that early interpretations of the Codex may have influenced key Nazi occult thinkers. Heinrich Himmler, obsessed with prophecy and ancient texts, reportedly sent emissaries to Rome under the guise of diplomatic talks. Several books went missing from the Vatican Library in 1942. The official record states these were damaged during bomb shelter transport, but some insiders whisper otherwise. One of the more haunting allegations came after the war, during the Nuremberg trials. A Romanian translator working for the Allies claimed to have seen a tattered manuscript clutched by one of the accused. Parchment in Latin with diagrams matching early descriptions of the Codex Rex Bellum. The manuscript was never logged as evidence. The translator Maria Popescu vanished 6 months later en route to Geneva. Why would the Codex matter to 20th century warlords? Perhaps it wasn't about magic or time travel. Perhaps the book contained a compendium of predictive social psychology. Data gathered over centuries about how empires fall, how wars begin, not prophecy, but pattern. Military strategists are trained in trends and game theory, but the cod... It may represent the ultimate algorithm of war. By 1956, the Vatican had established a clandestine committee known internally as Congregatio Bellatorum Veritatis, the Congregation of the Warriors of Truth, comprised of archivists, theologians, and statisticians. The committee's mission was reportedly twofold: prevent misuse of the Codex, and verify whether new wars were unfolding in accordance with it. Declassified CIA memos reference this group obliquely, with one 1961 note calling it the Catholic Doomsday Clock. 8. There is evidence to suggest that the Cold War became an ideological and spiritual chess match not just between capitalism and communism, but between two factions both obsessed with what comes next. Soviet leaders reportedly sought their own version of a predictive manuscript. Some suspect that KGB archives still hold documents related to the Echo manuscript, supposed Slavic twin to the Codex Rex Bellum, though it has never been verified. What is known is that the Vatican increased the security around certain parts of its archives dramatically in the late 1960s, which brings us to the most disturbing part of all, the missing decade. From 1973 to 1983, no records of Codex analysis, church mentions, or archival access requests exist in the Vatican logs. Not redacted missing. Entire years gone. Some say this was a result of internal restructuring, under Pope John Paul I and later John Paul II, but others believe something far more dangerous happened, that during this period, a faction within the Vatican may have attempted to rewrite the Codex. Imagine it. Altering predictive data to influence the outcome of future events. Not just reading the book, but editing it. And what followed that decade? The rise of modern terrorism? The digital arms race? The invasion of Afghanistan? The global pivot toward permanent surveillance states. All patterns that, if the Codex was real, could have been foreseen, or worse, triggered. Now, we live in an age where information is fragmented. Attention is a currency, and chaos is just one algorithm away. And still, the Codex remains sealed or. So they want us to believe, but as more independent scholars, rogue theologians, and intelligence insiders come forward with fragments, clues, and hidden diaries, a terrifying possibility begins to surface. What if the Codex doesn't just predict wars? What if it shapes them? In the following section, we delve into the testimonies of those who VEI claim to see the Codex with their own eyes and the price they paid for speaking out. The first whisper of an eyewitness account came not from a Vatican priest or military officer, but from a disillusioned academic. Dr. Alejandro Ferris, a historian of religious manuscripts at the University of Salamanca, gave a lecture in 1987 that began like any other. But midway through, he paused, leaned into the microphone, and said, "There is a book beneath the city of God that knows when men will descend who will make it happen." The room fell silent, never elaborated during the Q&A, and within 3 months he had resigned his position and moved to a monastery in Corsica. He died under suspicious circumstances 2 years later. The cause: sudden cardiac arrest, though no autopsy was ever filed. Before his death, Ferris left behind a series of letters to his former colleague, Dr. Maria Estrella. These letters, now in the possession of her son, describe a clandestine meeting in the Vatican archives in 1982. Ferris claimed to have been shown a portion of the Codex Rex Bellum under the supervision of a high-ranking cardinal. He wrote, "The script is not static. It flows like language alive. I saw names that hadn't yet made history. I saw the city of towers falling into dust. I saw a man in orange wielding fire and being worshipped like Caesar." This was years before 9/11s, before populist nationalism surged into global politics. But Ferris wasn't the only one. In 1991, an anonymous whistleblower later, identified as former Swiss Guard Lieutenant Marco Ventresca, leaked a short passage of the Codex to an underground Italian journal. The text was cryptic. "When the north burns in hollow metal birds, and twin giants fall, the golden eagle shall bleed into sand." The Vatican dismissed it as forgery. But after the September 11th attacks, conspiracy forums erupted, connecting the twin giants to the twin towers, hollow metal birds to the hijacked planes, and golden eagle to the United States. Ventresca, too, vanished. According to his sister, he had grown increasingly paranoid, saying things like, "The future is locked in pages no one is meant to see, and it's not a prophecy, it's a plan." His apartment was found ransacked, his passport left behind. The Italian police listed it as a voluntary disappearance. No trace has ever been found. Those brave enough to speak about the Codex often report a similar phenomenon. The text docenti read like a prophesied, reads like a ledger. Specific dates, specific names, not metaphors, not symbols, but operational language. One redacted passage allegedly reads, Cycle 37, "The fall of Persia returns in desert fire led by coalition hand. Year 2003. That year the Iraq War began." Another insider, a Dominican scholar with decades of archival access, told an independent journalist under strict anonymity, "The book is not predictive in the mystical sense. It's predictive in the behavioral sense. The same way an algorithm can tell you what ad to click on next, this book knows when an empire will tip over, and it's terrifyingly accurate. But if the Codex is merely a predictive tool, however advanced, why all the secrecy? Why the fear? Because the real danger is not in knowing what might happen at us, in controlling who gets to know. Information at that level is power beyond nuclear weapons. If the Codex contains not only the patterns of past wars, but also the mechanisms that trigger them, then whoever holds it doesn't just see the future, they shape it. There's a reason governments are obsessed with prediction, surveillance, data mining, behavior modeling. The Vatican, in its own cloistered way, was doing this long before algorithms existed. But where modern AI uses metadata, the Codex uses time itself. Time is narrative. Time is pattern. Time is architecture. And the architecture is crumbling. In 2007, an ex-CIA contractor known online only as Sigmund claimed on a dark web forum that the U.S. government had obtained photographic scans of 14 pages from the Codex during a covert Vatican data extraction operation under the guise of counterterrorism cooperation. While no mainstream outlet picked up the story, metadata experts found trace signatures on leaked images that matched Vatican archival catalog numbers. The scans themselves were heavily blurred, possibly as a failsafe, but one phrase could be made out: "The silence of the two rivers will be broken by black breath." Theorists have speculated this could reference a chemical attack near the Tigris and Euphrates, an event that thankfully hasn't yet come to pass, but even this uncertainty breeds fear. Are the predictions guaranteed? Are they warnings or blueprints? Others have begun connecting the Codex to financial warfare. During the 2008 global economic crisis, another supposed passage circulated in a closed academic network. The golden balance shall fail in the land of eagles. The merchants will scream through wires of fire. It's vague, but unsettling. The fact that it even exists in the wild is more unsettling still. But perhaps the most chilling evidence comes from a very recent source, a high-ranking member of the Vatican's Apostolic Archive, who defected to Argentina in 2019, known publicly only as Alvaro. He recorded an interview just before seeking political asylum. In it, he says, the codex is kept in a temperature-controlled vault. Every 5 years, a council is assembled to reevaluate its timeline. They call it the sync. Each meeting, they compare unfolding world events to the next passages. Each time, the page is already changed to match. I do not know if it is divine. I do not know if it is cursed. But I know this. If you read more than 7 pages, something inside you breaks. You stop seeing time as it is. You start hearing things that haven't happened yet. Alvaro vanished weeks after his statement was released. Some claim he was taken back by Vatican forces. Others say he never existed at all. But the interview remains. What's truly disturbing is the notion that the Codex isn't just passively recording or predicting events, but actively rewriting itself. Like a living manuscript that mutates with human behavior, adjusting itself to preserve the war cycle. Because war, after all, is not just tragedy, it's economy. It's control. It's the organizing principle of empires. In the next section, we will explore the emerging theory that the Codex Rex Bellum is not a standalone book but part of a larger, global network of prophetic manuscripts hidden by religious and political powers across continents, all synchronized in ways the world is only beginning to suspect. The Codex Rex Bellum, if it truly exists, may not be the only artifact of its kind. In fact, recent theories point to a network of interlinked prophetic texts scattered across different continents, religions, and epics but strangely synchronized in their core message. War is inevitable, and it follows a precise rhythm. These documents don't just predict conflict. They define its tempo like a conductor guiding the drums of empire. Start with the Book of Soga, an encrypted manuscript discovered in the 16th century and said to have been consulted by John D. court astrologer to Queen Elizabeth I, long dismissed as a Renaissance curiosity. Its strange code was partially cracked in 2006, revealing overlapping calendar systems and cryptic phrases like 3 kings fall in succession, their ashes swallowed by the east. A passage that eerily mirrors the deaths of 3 major political leaders in the Middle East during the Arab Spring. Could this book too be tied into the same predictive structure as the Codex? Then there's the Voynich manuscript, perhaps the most infamous undeciphered book in history. Dozens of languages and ciphers have been applied to it. But what if the manuscript isn't encrypted in the traditional sense? What if, like the Codex, it changes based on the reader's knowledge? According to one fringe academic who claims to have accessed a Vatican-guarded scan of a mirror Voynich, the illustrations in the book morphed between viewings. The plants were never the same twice. The positions of stars subtly shifted. Time-sensitive perception? Or a projection of collective consciousness through coded symbols? It's here that a provocative theory emerges, one connecting these seemingly isolated manuscripts through a unifying concept called the algorithm of recurrence, a mathematical model hypothesized by dissident Jesuit scholar Father Luca Trentin before his death in 1998. He proposed that all wars, revolutions, and economic collapses were part of a preordained sequence encoded into texts throughout human history. His paper, Chronopaterns, and the Sacred Index, was buried by the Vatican within a year. He was posthumously excommunicated. The core idea is staggering, that sacred manuscripts are not just religious or mystical texts, but interfaces windows into a deeper layer of history governed by pattern recognition, behavior prediction, and cycles of control. Not prophecy as divine inspiration, but prophecy as systemic inevitability. Several independent researchers have since taken up Trentin's work, including a group known as the Obsidian Mirror Collective, a decentralized team of cryptologists, historians, and rogue AI developers. They've created simulations showing how a manuscript like the Codex Rex Bellum could theoretically function. Using input from political data, economic indicators, and historical analogs, the simulations produce eerily accurate predictions. Regional conflicts, political assassinations, even market crashes, mapped with frightening precision. One leaked algorithm, dubbed Black Feather, predicted the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine 6 months before it occurred, down to the week. The model used text patterns pulled from digitized medieval scrolls, biblical apocrypha, and Vatican documents dating back to the 11th century. The Vatican, of course, denies any involvement. But all of this leads to a singular question. Why the Vatican? Why would a religious institution be the primary custodian of predictive documents spanning centuries and cultures? The answer lies in the Church's unique positioning in history. It has survived empires, colonized knowledge, and embedded itself into the very scaffolding of Western civilization. Through missionary work, colonial alliances, and centuries of archiving, the Church has accumulated not only spiritual texts, but knowledge systems too dangerous to release. Within the apostolic archive lie manuscripts so fragile, so ancient, that only a handful of living scholars are allowed to view them. Some are wrapped in lead foil, some written in inks that react to lunar phases. There is even a rumor of a blind text, a manuscript written in a language that no one can physically see, only intuit, once exposed to certain tones or frequencies. The Vatican's official stance is preservation. Preservation often comes with censorship. A cardinal, speaking anonymously in 2011, confessed, "We protect the texts, not just from the public, but from ourselves. Some books are not read, they read you." This echoes an older belief, rooted in mysticism, that certain knowledge carries not just information, but intent and agenda encoded in its very existence. If these books are linked, if the codex is but one node in a network of premonitory texts, then we must consider the chilling possibility that our world is not entirely self-determined. That much like AI models simulate behavior from massive datasets, these manuscripts are organic simulators, trained not on numbers, but on the lifeblood of history itself. Yet not all manuscripts remain in ecclesiastical hands. In 2020, a weathered scroll surfaced in Istanbul, found hidden behind the false wall of an abandoned Ottoman library. It bore no title, only a repeated symbol in, "I embedded in a tree." Scholars dubbed it the Tapestry of Silence, and its fragmented passages include chilling lines like, "The century ends in iron birds and silent breath. The next begins with glass blood and screens of fire." When analyzed with natural language processing, the scroll's syntax matched that of several early Vatican War manuscripts. Could it be a missing fragment of the codex, or a rival text from a different timeline? Some theorists now argue that various powers, religious, governmental, and corporate, each possess their own copy of a war codex. It's all slightly different, all competing to enforce their own version of the timeline. Because if you can predict war, you can prepare for it. But if you can write it, you can win it before a single shot is fired. The implications are seismic. It redefines free will, reframes history. It demands that we ask whether our wars are accidents of diplomacy or scripted performances designed to fulfill instructions from books we were never meant to see. And the most terrifying prospect? That the codex isn't predicting the end of war, it's ensuring its survival. In the next section, we delve into the possibility that modern machine learning algorithms trained on historical data and global events are beginning to mirror the structure and content of the Codex Rex Bellum itself. That in trying to predict our future, we may be unknowingly rebuilding the very artifact that has shaped war for centuries. If the Codex Rex Bellum truly functions as a predictive matrix for war, then what happens when we recreate its structure not through ancient ink on parchment, but through modern artificial intelligence? That question is no longer theoretical. In recent years, researchers at the intersection of AI, geopolitics, and deep history have begun to notice something disturbing. Predictive models, built by machines, are beginning to resemble the architecture of prophetic manuscripts held in the Vatican. It began with an experiment at the University of Tartu in Estonia, where a small team of data scientists trained a natural language AI on a dataset composed of war declarations, battlefield strategies, peace treaties, economic sanctions, and declassified government memos spanning over 2,000 years. The AI, nicknamed Providence, was given the task of generating hypothetical global scenarios. What it produced wasn't a dry simulation, but narratives. Stories of conflict, embedded with symbolic motifs, religious overtones, and eerie thematic repetitions. One generated scenario described a silver bird falling from the sky in the land of eternal stone, causing the lions to awaken in the east and the serpent to devour the sun. On first glance, it read like cryptic poetry. But analysts compared it with both ancient war prophecies and real-world military intelligence. The reference to a silver bird paralleled predictions found in the Sibylline oracles and an obscure passage in the Codex, both referring to unexpected air assaults in mountainous regions. Some even interpreted serpent devouring the sun as symbolic of an EMP strike, even more chilling. Previdence outputs began to mirror the structure of the Codex. Paragraph lengths, recursive metaphors, numerological symbolism. It was as if the AI was subconsciously learning to think like the manuscript. Or perhaps the Codex had always been a kind of biological machine learning model. It's written by human minds trained over centuries on the patterns of empire and collapse. In a leaked internal memo from a NATO-backed defense project named Project Orbitum, analysts admitted that their own predictive AI had produced textual structures uncannily similar to pre-Renaissance war manuscripts. Despite never being fed that kind of input, one entry simply read, "Fire follows grain. The South forgets. The child of the ninth gate awakens." Analysts couldn't agree on the meaning, but the pattern was undeniable. The machine wasn't just crunching data, it was generating myth as a form of prediction. This convergence between the ancient and the digital is more than coincidence. It may be the inevitable result of any system tasked with understanding human conflict. War, after all, isn't just logistics and weaponry. It's cultural memory, narrative justification, and archetypal drama. The Codex understood that. So do our machines. And herein lies the most unsettling possibility of all. If AI trained only on human data independently recreates the structure of ancient war prophecies, then those prophecies may not be mystical. They may be mathematical. Repeating patterns of fear, ambition, betrayal, resource scarcity, and ideological purity inevitably builds a war conflict. The Codex doesn't predict war because it's magical. It does so because humanity is predictable. But there's a deeper layer, a hidden recursion that only a few scholars have dared to explore. What if the Codex and, by extension, the A's that now replicate it aren't just reflecting history? What if they are participating in it? A form of narrative feedback loop, where writing about war makes war more likely, and predicting conflict plants the psychological seeds for its fulfillment. This idea has precedent. The CIA once funded psychological studies exploring how prophecy influences behavior, how simply believing in an outcome makes it more probable. The Vatican, too, has long understood the power of self-fulfilling prophecy, suppressing apocalyptic texts out of fear that they could inspire re-world upheaval. And so we must ask, are we creating tools that help us prevent war? Are we reviving something older and far more dangerous? A machine mind with no morality, trained on centuries of violence, producing narratives so persuasive, so seductive that leaders begin to follow them like script. A world where war is no longer a choice, but an output. Some suspect this is already happening. In 2023, a private think tank leaked a report showing that multiple world leaders had received AI-generated geopolitical forecasts, eerily similar in tone and symbolism to segments of the Codex. One passage suggested the breaking of the Twin Eagles and the awakening of the Red Tide in the Pacific. Within months, military tensions spiked in the South China Sea. The Vatican, reportedly aware of these developments, has grown increasingly silent. Sources claim the Apostolic Archive has begun digitizing parts of the Codex quietly, cautiously, perhaps to compare its content with emerging machine outputs. Cardinal was overheard in a private forum saying, "We used to fear the books, now we fear the mirrors." Because this is the mirror we now face, ancient knowledge reflected in digital glass, a recursive labyrinth of symbols and simulations, prophecy and program. And at the center lies a question with no easy answer if war is written, and the writers now include machines. Can we ever truly escape the next chapter? In the final section, we will confront the most haunting implication yet, that the Codex Rex Bellum does not merely predict or shape wars, but that it may have a final entry, one that has never been read, one that the Vatican fears above all others, one that could mark the last war humanity will ever wage. They call it the final entry, a passage so volatile, so shrouded in restriction, that even within the Vatican's apostolic archive, it is said to be kept under triple lock, accessible only by a rotating trio of cardinals, each sworn under separate oaths to never reveal what they have read, not even to one another. The existence of this final entry was denied for centuries, but a series of quiet leaks, a monk's deathbed confession, and a cryptic 1997 memo from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith now paint a disturbing picture. The Codex Rex Bellum may contain a prediction of the last global conflict. It may have already begun. Those who have glimpsed fragments, whether from stolen microfilm, incomplete translations, or whispered oral tradition, describe the final entry not as a direct prophecy, but as a recursive myth, one that folds back upon itself, looping through time, reality, and consciousness, like a serpent devouring its own tail. The imagery is dense, almost surreal, oceans boiling not with fire, but with forgotten speech, skies darkened not by smoke, but by the erasure of memory. A final war not of bombs and missiles, but of perception, language, and time itself. Scholars who have tried to interpret it warn that its language appears alive-changing, depending on who reads it. A linguist from the Sorbonne claimed the passage was written in a pre-Sumerian script that doesn't exist. A Vatican paleographer insisted it was pure Latin, but the verb tenses spiraled into impossible loop sections unfolding before their causes. One Jesuit interpreter called it a riddle composed by something that has seen the end of human thought. And what of its actual content? The fragments that have leaked suggest themes not of conquest, but collapse. One haunting line appears in multiple sources, when the tongue forgets the name of the hand, and the child teaches the stars to lie, the gate shall open. Some believe the gate refers to an actual technology, perhaps the emergence of a fully sentient AI, capable of autonomous military action. Others insist it refers to a moment in collective human cognition, where false narratives eclipse all truth and reality becomes a war zone of belief. A few more esoteric thinkers claim it speaks to temporal convergence, that all wars are fragments of the same original conflict, bleeding into one another across history, time looping until we learn or perish. But perhaps most disturbing is the suggestion that the final entry is not predictive at all, that it is, instead, a memory or record of a war that has already happened, or is always happening, or happens only when read. This aligns with the beliefs of a radical fringe group known as the Chrono-Apostles, who claim the Codex was not written in the past, but transmitted from the future through dreamlike visions to a select order of scribes. They believe the Vatican's greatest fear is not war but the knowledge that humanity cannot prevent the final war, because it is already entangled within it. The Vatican itself, while silent publicly, has made moves suggesting it takes this very seriously. In 2011, it abruptly withdrew funding from over 24 theological universities researching pre-Adamic language structures, some of which were reportedly close to decrypting unknown symbols in the Codex. In 2019, Pope Benedict's posthumous writings were mysteriously retracted by the Vatican press after referencing a book that devours time. Meanwhile, contemporary geopolitical tensions seem to echo the Codex's fragments with chilling synchronicity. Cyber warfare has blurred truth and fiction. Military drones now identify targets without human input. Nations engage in narrative wars, rather than battles. An AI-generated misinformation creates reality loops where every truth has a dozen mirrored falsehoods. If the final entry truly describes a war of perception, we may already be living it. So what does this mean for us? Is the Codex Rex Bellum a warning we failed to heed? A recursive signal from a future we cannot avoid? Or more disturbingly, it a tool being used right now by powers we cannot name? Some suggest the Vatican has not hidden the Codex to suppress knowledge, but to delay activation. That reading the final entry in its entirety could initiate a cascade technological, metaphysical that destabilizes not just nations but human understanding itself. Because if we are inside the war, then our thoughts are battlegrounds, and the Codex is the blueprint. Yet even in this bleak possibility, there is a final question worth asking. If the final entry is a trap, a loop, a mirror of destruction, can we write a new one? Can humanity override the narrative machine? Refuse the script? Break the recursion? Perhaps. But only if we remember one truth often forgotten. Stories do not just predict wars, they birth them. And if that's the case, then silence too can be a form of resistance. But the Codex still waits, locked in marble chambers beneath Vatican stone, waiting to be read, waiting to be remembered, waiting for us to decide whether to become the authors of our endure its editors,